There we go. There we are. Okay.
Of course, we're all making the dumbest face.
And we are live.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yep. So, here we have with us, we have Merlin joining us, and we have James joining us, two other DM friends. And they will be joining us for this session, and maybe in future sessions they'll join us as well. We are going to do something fun to get us started. We're going to roll for initiative to see who gets to ask the first question. I have our little markers, so choose a color, roll for initiative.
Did you intend to use that pun?
Markers? I did as soon as I decided that we were going to do markers.
I should have grabbed my dice out before. That'll fall.
Please tell me you didn't roll a 15.
Alright, I lay claim to the blue marker because it matches my dice.
Okay.
Then mine's red.
Doesn't like
black.
it. I got a 6.
Okay. James, roll again.
I got a plus
Dang
10
it.
to my-
Okay. So, blue will go first, then black, then red. Okay.
Wait, I get the first question.
You get the first question, so start us off.
Alright. So, my first question I decided to come up with is, what happens to a warlock class if your patron dies? Permanently. Your patron is gone. What happens to the warlock?
I'm pretty sure that he just loses all of his power, which would suck. You basically just became a level 1 character. Except for you'd have gotten all of your ability score improvements. And your health bonuses. But you would be level 0.
That's a weird question because I've thought about it a bunch of times because I've been in some instances where the warlock is in danger of losing their patrons, like the fact they like them. So it's like you get your powers from them and they can strip their powers away from you in theory because you're making a pact.
Yeah.
If you don't hold up your side, you lose it. So if they die, the question is, well, does the power remain? So if you have like a demon or a devil, they die. Is their power still there? Are they super powerful and can like somebody come and take it over? Well, so the pact still exists. And then
So it raises the question, does the warlock get their power from the patron or from the pact, which is facilitated by the patron?
Yeah. So what do you guys think?
Personally, I think that I think it comes from the pact. Like paladins, paladins get their power from their divine oath, kind of like the Knights Radiant. The warlocks, I think, get their power from their pact, and the beginning source of it is their patron. So if they break a tenet of the pact, or they just break it's like breaking a contract. You lose your power. If the patron dies, and there's no contingency set in the pact, or the warlock didn't break anything, I say the warlock still has their power. They just no longer have someone to answer to.
That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
No, I believe that if that were the case, I feel like the power wouldn't be able to increase because you wouldn't be able to act upon your pact anymore.
So your warlock class is now locked at its level.
Basically, so you basically
Until
at that
you
point have to
make a new
multi-class or transfer your pact to a new creature, which would be cool because you'd basically be multi-classing into warlock again, unless it is with the same. If you were a fiend warlock before and then made a pact with another fiend, it would probably just transfer over. But if you were a fiend warlock transferring your pact to a celestial, you'd be multi-classing warlock.
You could.
You'd have a split personality if you did that.
How that would work though? Well, game mechanically, that's kind of weird because you can't. It doesn't allow you to take the same class and change subclasses, which I guess is what gets odd.
So I guess if that happens, you can decide to keep either your original patron's abilities, like if you change from Fiend to Fey, you can choose to keep the Fiend or work up the Fey tree instead and just give up everything on Fiend.
Yeah.
Or just, if you hit, like say you hit your level 6 ability for Fey and you have your 6 ability for Fiend, you can choose to keep either Fey, to replace Fiend with Fey, or keep Fiend and just keep working up the Fey tree.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah, I feel like a lot of that would come down to like DM discretion. So so they're just like, no, you got to do this one thing because you chose it, or they'll be like, yeah, okay, I'll give you the option. I think giving the option would open up more opportunities though. It might break the game, so you have to be careful of that. It opens up some fun story stuff.
It actually makes me think of Oathbreakers for paladins once again, because now that I think about it, they're actually kind of the most similar classes because of how easy it is to like lose their powers. So for an Oathbreaker, they literally change to a different subclass. They become an Oathbreaking subclass, losing all of their other paladin subclass abilities and gaining Oathbreaker abilities. And if
Yeah.
they redeem themselves, they can regain either their old oaths abilities, or I believe it's written into the Dungeon Master's Guide that they can choose a new oath. I don't remember though.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually that's a
I'm
good point
wondering if a
because
warlock would do that same thing.
yeah, because the precedent is you lose all your abilities from before. You have to stick with one subclass, so it isn't mixing and matching, which I think comes down to game balance. Which is good. Yeah, I think that's a good point right there.
Which means if you were a Fiend Warlock and then lost your pack and switched to a Celestial Warlock, basically you would lose all of your Fiend abilities and just gain all the Celestial abilities, which I personally think are better, but
In your personal unbiased opinion.
unbiased opinion of
I,
Radiance.
I have always been Great Old One or Hexblade.
I like to heal.
Never
I enjoy being able to heal myself as a bonus action.
I mean, if you kill someone, technically, you can heal yourself as well. Hexblades are my favorite just because damage.
Best blade lock you can ever make.
Yes, absolutely.
Never played a warlock, so I wouldn't know.
A lot of fun.
Okay. Wizards are better.
Never played a wizard either. Oh,
Yes, you
one
have.
time.
Depends on the wizard.
One time. I
You
played,
played
one
it
time.
once.
Yes, evocation and reconstruction. All the rest of the classes don't exist in my mind.
Hey!
Abjuration is phenomenal. Abjuration wizards can tank like none other. I have proved this.
That is true. Okay,
Right, next question.
is it resolved?
I think it
Good
is.
question. If you
Good.
break your pact or your patron dies, you just go to another person, I guess.
Sounds
Okay.
great.
DM discretion.
DM discretion on that one,
Yeah.
but
Most of these are going to be that, but
There you go.
that was a good question. Okay, that brings it to mine. Actually,
Oh dear.
let's see.
Do you want to roll a
Um,
Decatur for that?
There's only 40 something.
so 2 D20s.
But then you'd miss out on a few.
That's fine.
You just roll a Decatur and ignore anything above 42.
Okay,
This is the way.
we've talked about this a few times, but your thoughts on a bag of holding inside of an anti-magic sphere, because all magic is void. The bag of holding is magic. So would it be a regular bag that you could just put stuff in? But then what happens when you get out of the sphere? The area of anti-magic.
That sounds very simple to me. It's just as long as you're in the anti-magic sphere, it's a normal bag. So it kind of works like a secret magical compartment. If you're in an anti-magic stuff, you can put something in the bag, but when you leave it, you can't access that. You can access the magical section. And when it becomes a normal bag again, you can reach the normal bit. So it can work as a nice hidden place mechanic, little hidden nook.
Interesting. I agree with you on that because the point of a magical of the bag of holding, the reason why it tears open the astral plane, because really it's a pocket, it creates a pocket dimension.
Mm-hmm.
So when you walk into magic and I feel I agree that it cuts off the pocket dimension, kind of like portable holes, handicap
Yes.
sack, all that stuff. The thing about what happens to the stuff you put in there, I would think when it opens back up, it's still in the bag, and it'll just fall back into the portal. If there's just too much stuff in there, it'll pop right back.
Yeah, and that's my thought is as soon as you leave it, the magic reappears. It's in the bag. It would just drop.
Well, it actually kind of depends on where the portal in the bag is set. Is it at the bottom of the bag, or is it at the top of the bag?
Okay, so I'm thinking bag of devouring. Because
I think what he's asking is it when you open it and you reach inside, you're immediately in there, or when your hand hits the proverbial bottom of the bag, it goes inside the extra dimensional plane?
I have no idea because I'm thinking of a bag of devouring because this is inherently related. This is very related to that.
It's like the evil uncle.
Yeah.
It's the sadistic trap.
It's the distant relation. I don't want to admit they relate.
Because if you look at the dimensions, it is a foot in diameter. So it's a big bag. So if you were to put something, like Russell said, is the portal at the top? Because if it's at the top and you put something in the bottom, would it fall into the portal? Into the whatever dimension it says it
Pocket
goes into.
dimension.
It's not a pocket dimension. It says what dimension.
It's like a little
Yeah.
demi-plane.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I should have brought my book.
You're okay. We have plenty.
Scattered into the astral plane.
That's when it rips, though.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I guess it would just be like a little pocket dimension.
I feel like it's got to be the. I feel like it's got to be as you enter the bag, but that would cause that you can't access your stuff that's in the bottom of the bag, which might increase the pounds over 15. So that would. I feel like that would.
So it would affect the overall weight of the bag if
Yeah.
you were in an anti-magic sphere. Put something in that doesn't reach over the top of the bag. That would.
Yeah, I'd say it would
Potentially.
change. It would affect its weight.
Yeah. So then you gotta figure out.
So you'd have to be careful with that one.
That's super complex. Yeah, my personal feeling, my intuition just said it's got to be at the top of the bag. For some reason, going to the bottom of the bag doesn't feel.
You'd have to
Right.
reach really far into that bag.
I mean, it's about that size, so it's not super far, but it is pretty.
I mean, if it's at your waist, you're like half an arm in.
That's fair. That's fair. You can pull it up and reach down into it. But
Oh, it's actually 2 feet in diameter at the mouth
The bag?
and 4 feet deep.
4 feet deep. Oh.
That's what it says right there. Roughly 2 feet in diameter at the
Sweet
mouth and
sister
4
of
feet deep.
Sedna,
Like
what?
this thing is huge.
It's a big bag. You could put a lot of things in there if it's at the top of the mouth. It would have to be. The portal would have to be at the top of the mouth for it to be like logical, or else you're like literally like half of your body. A halfling can fit in this bag.
Be careful, they'll suffocate.
In an anti-magic sphere, they could fit in the bag.
That's
Probably still
awesome.
suffocate.
I mean, halflings do make good meals, so an emergency ration.
Ooh.
Terrible.
I gotta tell you about the elf jerky at some point, but now is not the time.
Both of you are both just orcs at this point.
I wasn't the one eating it. That was another campaign.
Poor warforged. They don't get to eat anything.
I think that's actually a benefit, because if you make like a warforged assassin, they can just like sit underwater for 1,000 years, assuming they don't rust, I guess. But
So
don't
they
have to
don't
breathe.
rust, short circuit, lock up, a bunch of fun things.
They could sit underground for 1,000 years, then pop up like, hey, I'm here to kill you.
Alrighty.
Assassinate this person's grandson.
Okay.
That person's 3 years old. Yeah, assassinate their grandson.
All right, back to the main topic.
Yes.
So, go into an anti-magic sphere, cuts off magic. You can put stuff in the bag of holding.
I mean, after
and-
hearing your idea of if it once it goes back to being magical, whatever's in the non-magical bag gets just dropped into the magical.
Pocket.
I feel magical pocket. I feel like that makes the most sense. But dang, I love the secret compartment concept.
And both things do make sense. Like, if the portal is right here, at what point does that portal just stop if you're able to stop the portal and put stuff in it?
Yeah.
Or is it more similar to, how do I? It's not something a lot of people have read, but like Alcatraz,
Oh, yeah.
like expander's glass. Basically, it takes a small area and just makes it bigger. And so, like when the magic leaves, when you leave the anti-magic sphere, does the bag just inherently grow? But if that were the case, if you were to enter an anti-magic sphere, everything should just the bag should throw up.
It could. I mean, assuming the pocket dimension is if the DM decides the pocket dimension is inside the bag, then
Then you have to ask the question: is it a doorway to another pocket dimension, or is it just the same size, just magically resized?
yeah. And I think this is all DM discretion at this point.
There's too many separate ways to Sunday this can go.
Yeah. Those are our thoughts.
So
DM's discretion on that one.
Yeah.
3 different alleyways you can go on, though.
You can have fun with it.
My favorite is definitely the hidden compartment idea.
That is definitely a fun idea.
There's a series of comics by Next to the Dinner Table called Bag Wars, where basically the players created this massive thing inside these bags, and there's a massive world in there because they created a lot of issues with magical bags of holding. So if you ever want to read something about that, Next to the Dinner Table has a great arc.
Interesting.
Never heard of them.
And they're really cool.
Alrighty, that brings us to Russell. What's your question?
That is an excellent question. I didn't come up with questions. I'm the least prepared. But,
Would you like to
Not to,
cheat
you
off
know,
one of Alan's
use-
questions?
not to pull spoilers or anything, but we did run into a Sphere of Annihilation, and so I'm very curious what you guys' thoughts are. What happens when that enters an anti-magic sphere?
Because
Because it's not an artifact. It is literally just a magic item. So basically it comes down to how is a Sphere of Annihilation created? Can this simply be created by a bunch of wizards? Or does this actually have to be formed by a god?
Because if I remember correctly from its description, it's described as a literal hole in the multiverse being contained by a magical field. So when I was talking with Russell earlier, he made the point that if it's just that, then if the magical containment field goes, then it would just shrink in on itself, kind of like a deploting black hole, and just suck everything to it until the hole is filled. But going off the description, if it's a magical field containing a hole in the universe, isn't that word contain? Wouldn't that mean if you take it away, would the hole expand and get bigger? Because like in Tomb of Horrors, there's a 10-foot sphere, and they're typically 2 feet in diameter.
Yeah.
So it begs the question: what would happen?
Also, can you feed a Sphere of Annihilation until it grows bigger? Is it like a black hole? If you feed it, does it grow?
I mean, so if there is magic, so we're going off. So since there's magic containing it, I feel like you feed stuff to it. It doesn't necessarily grow in size because it's not like a human organism. I feel like just a hole in the multiverse that's looking to fill itself, or it's sucking you out into something else and destroying you effectively. So I feel like, I agree with you. When you pull off the magic, it's it's either got to suck everything in or it's got to expand.
And yet, but pulling off the magic, that requires it would require it to be made by a mortal to be able to pull the magic off.
That's true.
All right. Because
Otherwise,
most divine stuff ignores anti-magic.
if you can't pull the magic off, it's committed by
A god.
a god.
Or a demon. But according to the description, it says this 2-foot diameter black sphere is a hole in the multiverse, hovering in space, and stabilized by a magical field surrounding it.
It's just weird sounding to me to describe it as a hole,
stabilized,
but needing to be stabilized.
Right.
So,
Though I guess
So
if you think
I
of
was
it
wrong
as
with that.
a sinkhole, they do grow.
That's true.
So is it like it could be like a sinkhole scenario where it does actually just grow and start absorbing people into it when the magic is pulled off?
By the Dungeon Master's Guide, where it says you can create magic items, you just have to be level 17 or higher to create a legendary magic item. It costs a lot, but you could technically create a Sphere of Annihilation as a level 17
if you burn
wizard.
enough wish spells.
That would be an interesting campaign where mages are poking holes in the universe, and somebody comes down and says, "You got to stop that. You're causing lots of issues. Look at all these."
Magical version of a nuclear war.
There
Here
you
we
go.
go.
It's World War III.
Whole cities are just covered in one giant Sphere of Annihilation.
It reminds you so much of Balefire from The Wheel of Time.
Never heard of it.
It's scary. It literally removes people from existence, as if they never existed. Like Fireball, but it's like you never existed.
More effective.
More divination, like. Interesting.
All right. So,
I would probably say it becomes unstabilized.
so
But
then
does
what
that
would
mean it
happen?
shrink or does it expand? I would feel like though that it has to shrink. Because I feel like if it's absorbing things and I don't know.
So
It's almost like it really just depends on how you view it. Is the magic pushing the hole and keeping it from expanding, or is the magic pulling and creating creating the void?
Ooh.
Do you want to go first?
No, I was just saying that's a good thought.
I think a lot of what it comes down to is basically how you create it. So if it's more like so I feel like if you're just poking holes in the multiverse,
It would be pulling it open, because if you're making it to be it's like you're poking a hole and now you keep making magic to keep it open. Whereas the opposite, you find a hole and now you're trying to keep it closed.
Yeah.
But if the magic is keeping it stable, meaning if the magic's gone, it's unstable. So, mattering on your point of view, it's unstable. It's trying to stabilize itself.
There you go.
So it's either getting bigger to try to give itself a bigger. I can English today. So it's either getting bigger to stabilize itself, or it's getting smaller because it can't maintain that. Or it could just go in a giant multiversal explosion.
It
So-
could rip a hole in the multiverse.
So I guess it kind of depends on who poked the hole. Is this a deity hole where a deity or demon decided to poke a hole? Because in my eyes, if they were to poke a hole, it would start unraveling and growing. But I feel like a humanoid making this is going to have to try and just like
Rip a hole.
and try and keep it open.
Yeah.
Where reality will try and push it itself back together.
Actually, this reminds me, when I was younger, I used to play with soap suds in a sink, and don't worry, this will tie in. I'd poke little holes in it, and the soap suds would always just clean it back together. But once I made it bigger, it kind of just stayed there. So I'm thinking maybe it's like that. If you poke a hole and it's small enough, then the multiverse will just fix itself, no problem. But if you make it big enough, it gets to a point where, okay, I don't have enough material to fix this.
That's true. And I think that also raises a great question. Do we want to make the multiverse like its own entity? So it wants to fix it. Or does it just exist and it's this thing
Well,
so that no matter what happens to it, it can't repair itself?
judging by like just the definition of the anti-magic sphere spell, the multiverse by itself might not be an entity, but the magic in it is.
Okay.
Because the anti-magic sphere, what it does is it rips a hole in the magic of the multiverse. And so basically, if you look at it that way, you're basically creating a Sphere of Annihilation on a small scale. Instead of ripping all of reality, all you're doing is pushing magic out.
I think another way you can look at it is it's just it's like a spell overriding all other spells. No other spells exist except this spell. You can't cast anything in here except anti-magic. It's
You
like
can't even cast anti-magic in an anti-magic.
that's the way I'm thinking, because to me it kind of makes little sense to have magic make a anti-magic thing, kind of like a dead magic zone. But if you think of it as, all right, this magic is overriding and nothing else can move because there's no room for anything else to do anything. So it's just one spell taking over this entire area and locking it down.
Or you could look at it as basically the wizard takes the spell slot, whereas I like to view spell slots as kind of like energy that he gains from practice. Like as they're growing, they just get more energy
Practiced
to
and
feel it.
efficient.
And so basically they take the energy that they would use to use magic and they instead push the magic away from them. In which case, by the definition, magic cannot enter the sphere unless it is created by a deity or
Or an
an artifact.
It's true.
So that's a giant can of worms.
Yes, but I do like the soap suds.
If it was bigger, it would probably get
expand.
bigger. But since it's only 2 feet in diameter, it would probably
Just
pop.
shrink.
shrink.
Because
Or probably-
because I remember from its item description, it had some interesting clauses for if it went through portals or into an extra dimensional space. 50% chance it just disappears, it destroys itself.
The sphere is destroyed, yes.
35% chance it goes through or into the extra dimensional space, and another 35% chance it just destroys everything. Kind of like putting a handy haversack in a bag of holding, except kind of worse.
Just a little.
Sucking everything within 180 feet towards it, and popped up somewhere on a random plane.
So you probably could, as soon as it enters an anti-magic field, roll on this table.
Yeah.
It wouldn't open a portal. I feel like it would though. In my mind, I feel like if you remove the sphere, the protective stabilizing magic, it would just suck everything around it to it, which means everyone just takes a lot of bludgeoning damage, and the poor guy in the middle is gonna hurt.
Better hope you're barbarian.
But once it sucks in the anti-magic sphere,
Well, it depends on how you cast it. If it's just a spellcaster using it, then it doesn't matter.
all right.
They just get bludgeoned and probably knocked unconscious if they're a wizard.
40-10 is a lot of damage for a wizard to take.
Very much so.
So yeah, it would probably implode or explode,
Depending on
depending on
how big it is.
Yes.
So don't use anti-magic sphere around the one in the Yawning Portal. Not Yawning Portal. In
Tomb of Horrors.
Tomb of Horrors.
And short takes special care with holes in the multiverse.
Yes.
So there's at least 20 avenues you can go down.
Yeah. Oh, God, that's hopeful.
Probably not.
Well, it is for campaign fodder. If you want to make conflict.
Yes. Yes.
That would be an interesting conflict. The story is that someone did put a large anti-magic sphere around a Sphere of Annihilation, and it's slowly expanding.
Oh, and then
And the campaign is to try
damn.
and stop it.
So anti-magic just suppresses the effects. So what happens if someone successfully pulls a dispel magic on this thing?
On the Sphere of Annihilation.
Well, if
He
you,
pulls a dispel magic.
I feel like
Which banishes the
with
magic
a
there
sphere-
instead of suppressing it.
a Sphere of Annihilation basically would, when you, because once you have it's imploded on itself and you leave the area, or the anti-magic stops, basically you would end up with the magic that was trying to stabilize it would come back but be stabilizing nothing.
Interesting.
Unless it's the magic that's stabilizing itself holding it open.
Mhm.
In which case it would implode, and then when the magic came back, it would expand again.
All right, but off the side of anti-magic, dispel magic gets rid of magic. So if you cast that, say at 9th level, and succeeded on an insane DC check, and got rid of this magic sustaining and stabilizing that means it no longer has something stabilizing it at all.
I
There's
think it
nothing
it
there.
would just do the exact same thing. It would just implode but not come back.
Yeah.
I mean, the alternative option, we talk about expanding and decreasing. The alternative option to all this is maybe just exist as a whole in the multiverse now and just stays the same. And then, well, I guess that also you also have to consider the fact that it does say contain
And
No,
it
it's-
stays
and
stabilized.
stabilize.
It would become an
So-
unstabilized thing. It's like your cells. When your cells become unstabilized, they become cancer and they grow really fast.
But this is a whole we're talking.
But this is a whole.
Yes.
So it kind of just depends on if
But wait,
It's-
that just there's something else with the Sphere of Annihilation is that wizards with a high enough intelligence check can move it.
That's true.
When do you move a hole in the universe? So maybe the magic, stabilizing it is also allows you to move it around. So when that's gone, it's just permanently in one spot.
That's really true.
You are
because-
unable. No one can move it anymore. It's just permanently stuck until you can re-stabilize it again.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because if the magic is gone, then because magic is what allows you to move it. So there's no other option.
so maybe in some certain cases, certain sizes of spheres wouldn't expand or shrink. They would just stay. Bigger than that starts expanding, absorbing things.
Smaller than that, it
just
starts to shrink.
implodes. So I guess we've come to the conclusion it's basically based on how large your sphere is, which also comes to the question of what happens if you run two spheres of annihilation into each other. Do they grow then?
Would they just kind of mesh
Meld.
together?
I feel like they would expand at that point. I feel like that would be the one way of growing them.
Because the way I see the concept of moving a hole in the universe is you're just replacing the matter there. You're not it's moving it, but you're moving the matter around, so no matter is lost. So if you take two holes and push them together, you are now dealing with one bigger hole.
Which would probably increase the DC of trying to move it, but you could just make one big hole and keep it in one spot.
That makes sense. Yeah, because
That
one
could make a
sphere is-
really fun campaign.
just have the party run around collecting spheres of annihilation, trying to destroy the world.
Okay, or you get one bigger and big enough, and you take a couple tries and you successfully get it in a portable hole, and you just leave that as a trap for players. like a 10-foot magical sphere as they fall into a pit trap and now they're gone forever.
That would be great. That would be totally great. There was a thing I read where this DM had, it's like, well, I'm trying to figure out how to make these kobolds figure out how to get rid of their waste in this cave. And he's like, oh, they have a Sphere of Annihilation. That's simple. And the third's like, oh yeah, we're going to climb down to this place because we don't know there's Sphere of Annihilation down there. And they go down one by one. And they're like, okay, Bob, you're done. Yeah, your turn. Like, wait, what happened to me? I can't tell you. What happened to me? I can't tell you. And they all killed themselves in the Sphere of Annihilation.
That's awful.
Alright, so question slightly somewhat in some
Depends
mangled
on the
way
size.
resolved.
Depends on the size.
And
Yes.
DM discretion.
Yes.
DM discretion and size.
DM
Simplest thing you could do is just roll on the table. Worst comes to worst, it blows up and everything within 180 feet. It's blown up as well.
No, there is an adventure hook. All your players on separate planes trying to get back together.
It'd be
That would
really
be
hard.
a lot of work, but that could be really cool. Right.
Okay. That question is resolved. Merlin,
Let me take a look.
shoot.
Alright.
Going along with this magical theme. So one of the things that I like to build when I build characters is I look at magical abilities and non-magical abilities. 'Cause I like to know if I get put in an anti-magic field, will I still have access to this stuff? So that's why I like fighters and barbarians a lot, because a lot of their abilities are non-magical. But there's some that tend to like toe the line. So if you get like the Dragonborn's breath weapon, is that inherent or is there like magic there?
I would consider it inherent.
Yeah.
Or the barbarian's rage beyond death ability that allows him to go beyond the normal consciousness. Is that a magical ability because it's from the zealot, which is inherently divine, or is that like a
Oh, that is the
stamina
zealot?
person? Uh-huh.
I would say that it is actually not a magical ability. Just based on creatures like ghosts, revenants that are animated after death by a will to live or a task to do, finish.
Sheer willpower.
So basically, it is literally the barbarian is too dumb to die. Or too angry to die, as the one popular meme says.
I like that. I like that interpretation. One of the other things that is interesting to think about, you have a warforged, and they are inherently animated by magic. Whether or not they have souls is up to debate, and there's some people who think differently on this.
That's not
So
the
what
question.
happens with them as soon as they enter into an anti-magic field?
I feel like they're not animated by magic just by the fact that they can actually use divine magic. Because if you think about it, would a god give blessings to in their mind, a toy?
It matters because I think one of the supreme gods running a plane, I think Mechanus, I
Yeah.
can't remember what his name is.
Yeah.
But he made his little construct creatures, the Modrons. If going off the idea that he made Warforged or some other deity of similar caliber or alignment made the Warforged, wouldn't they be considered divine constructs and therefore not susceptible to anti-magic?
Yes.
Yeah.
But
But
another,
they're not made by...
and then that way I'm gonna turn to Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive series for this. It's like the way I think it's like Shardplate that lost its Stormlight. It's now just works like normal machinery. It no longer has magic helping it out. So if it's built right, it might still barely function. And once it has its magic back, it can work back as normal. Because the Shardplate, it still works. It just no longer has the extra Iron Man-ish stuff that helps you move it. It's just super heavy and you can't move it, so people consider it unusable.
That's a good point. So for you guys, what makes the delineation in between a magical ability and a non-magical ability?
A lot of the time it's when it's specified.
Yeah.
Because if a monster specifies make a melee magic spell attack or a ranged spell attack, then obviously it's not going to work in an anti-magic sphere.
Yeah.
According to the definition. That does not mean that magic is a spell, which means counterspell will not work on it necessarily.
Sure.
But it does mean that it will not enter an anti-magic sphere. And then you have things kind of like monks, where they have chi. And in my mind, chi is not magic just because there are forms of obviously not as overpowered in real life, but like there are ways of basically moving the body's energy and focusing on one specific thing so much that you get really good at it. And that's what I feel like monks are able to do.
the way I've imagined chi, because if I remember correctly, it's like a manifestation of their soul. So it's like moving their soul around to manipulate the world around them. Kind of like mystic psionics before it was scrapped. So I'd say like monks' abilities would be immune to anti-magic because it's their own spirit and soul they're using to fuel their stuff.
Yeah, with the exception of Way of Four Elements, I would say, because that.
Yes, that one does. That one does specify that you're like expending chi points to cast spells, which don't work.
Yeah, but yeah, I would agree with that.
Which kind of ruins my
It's
Spyro build.
they're using chi to strong arm magic.
Yeah.
Tap into the weave. I'm the Avatar.
All right, but so what about other classes? Like druids and rangers draw their magic from nature and Mother Gaia. If you're going to go with that storyline, paladins draw it from their divine oaths. Clerics from a god of some kind. Warlocks from their patrons, and the other spellcasters just from the pure magic around them.
It's true. So there was an example that I was thinking of the other day. So I think one of the interesting delineations you get from, especially from paladin, especially from like the combined classes. So paladin being like a combination of cleric and fighter, ranger being a combination of fighter and druid. I think those are where like the most interpretation is sometimes found, because it does become the question is it martial ability for the ranger, for example, that he can do all this really cool stuff with his blades and his bond with his beast, or is it all magical, or are the effects simply magical? So when it gets taken away, does whatever happened because that was strengthened by the magic still exist?
I would say for example, the ranger, a lot of their stuff, except for their spells, are all martial ability. Like there's a lot of examples in real life where people do the things that rangers do in Dungeons and Dragons. Granted, it's really hard to shoot a lot, like 9 arrows in 6 seconds. That's a little extreme, but it is more martial prowess than magic. Druids are basically useless in anti-magic sphere. I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure that shape-shifting is considered magic.
Yeah.
Unless you're
it would be a divine.
So
magic.
that begs the question: would magic coming from nature itself be considered a divine source?
I would say no.
I would
But it's not arcanic.
It's not, but it has its own something.
Personally, the way I would rule it is I would count it first as magic, so an anti-magic field would affect it. But the type that's where I think it gets really weird. And to a degree, I kind of consider it. I personally treat it as divine magic, since that falls within it's nearest to the definition the game gives. It's not arcane for sure, because arcane taps into the weave. You're tapping into the earth, not the weave. Divine magic goes into a patron god, and basically, if you're a druid, basically your god is the world
earth.
and the earth.
So basically, I feel like druids they tap into the earth for magic, and if the earth is created by a deity, or in the case of Ebron, is the deity, technically on Ebron, druids are divine magic wielders.
Yeah.
So I guess it comes down to your world and how it's composited. If the world is created by a god, or if the world is a god, like with a Mother Gaia situation, things like that.
Yeah. Or what if we even have a fault? No, I was going to comment about that. I can't remember. We'll come back to it.
All right. So we've somewhat solved the ranger and the druid. Moving on to clerics and paladins. So let's start with cleric. How would that work?
Well, that's the thing. Is divine magic is still magic and is not allowed in the sphere unless the god is the one that has created a particular object.
So divine
creature.
intervention would work in
Yes.
anti-magic, but
Which
any of its other abilities
So
would
spells automatically no. Divine
Ex-
channel divinity.
Channel divinity is a magical effect. I count almost anything that counts as divine magic as a magical effect.
not. Yes.
So I would say even stuff like divine intervention. So, in theory, assuming you have to make a lot of assumptions here. So assuming that the god actually assuming you're a level 20 cleric and you go ahead and say, hey, I need this, and your god looks down and you're like, you're important enough because you're level 20, you're epic level. I'm gonna listen to what you can. I can hear what you can say because I mean, I can try to do something, but I can't do anything magical because you are in an anti-magic zone. So I got to figure out something on the outside that can maybe come in and do something. Maybe that's like an angel, and then.
Well, that's the other thing. If something is created by the god, anti-magic doesn't affect it. So if the god decides that I am going to nullify you in the anti-magic zone, would that work? Could a god say that you can cast spells here?
I think
it wouldn't be able to pass through
one way
anything.
I think one way you could look at it is kind of like a game server, and the gods are the administrative moderators with all kinds of overpowered privileges. So they can say, nope, this doesn't affect me here, because they can do stuff in anti-magic while other people can't. So maybe you could say they could try to nullify it, weaken its effects, or pull something like smite them from above with lightning or something. I'd say channel divinity might also work in an anti-magic sphere, up to DM discretion, because personally I think it's them channeling the power of their god into some predetermined form the god has already given them to use. Like the clerics turn undead and their separate abilities going from the different order domains.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Apparently I had a misunderstanding. I thought that when I read the anti-magic field thing, I thought it just suppressed the effects of our artifacts and deities, but that was wrong. It doesn't
No.
suppress them, so
They work still.
they still work.
That's
Going to change how I do
interesting.
This is why you don't give your beginning players anti-magic.
I wasn't planning on giving you them.
That was still
You
one of
left
those
it in
brilliant
the
moments.
ceiling.
Where else would it be?
You left it in the room with a pirate. That was your mistake.
Well, that's the thing. The funny thing with the anti-magic field, can't it pass through material?
It can,
So you could
but it's a
literally
lead room.
you could have hidden it though. So you could have had a lead floor, right,
Yes,
with wooden planking over the top, hidden it underneath a board.
could have, yes.
Could have.
Or the same thing but in the ceiling.
But you have to realize that I didn't actually have the anti-magic sphere planned out at that point.
This
I came up with that after he stole it because I didn't think anything would happen.
That was still one of the most brilliant and my favorite parts of that entire series.
All right. Though this is a hilarious talking concept, we're getting kind of off the question
Yeah.
subject.
Yeah, that's
So, we all agree almost all forms of spell casting suppressed
Yes.
unless a predetermined criteria. If I remember correctly, the question is character abilities and stuff.
Yes. So yeah,
Alright.
delineation between magic and non-magical ability.
So it goes down to that. I think we've covered everything the cleric can do, at least without spells, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Then you got paladins, but their magic comes from their
From the
oath, which
So
is
it's
basically.
divine.
It's not even like fully divine though.
I would consider it to a large degree divine because you look at, for example, the paladin's fighting style. That's not magical. But you look at divine health. It says magic flows through your veins and it makes you immune to poison and disease.
It's true.
Magical ability.
Oh, what about their natural ability to sense good and evil? What about that one?
I feel like that's magical as well.
Yeah, I'd
Probably
probably
is.
say it was magical.
Because the way I see it, because there's a couple, because with the 16 separate planes, at least going off that, there's each different plane symbolizes something, and there's a couple of them deliberated for order and oaths and things like that. So you could argue that the paladin's oath magic is drawing off the energy of those planes.
I never considered that before. That's interesting.
I haven't
So-
looked too much into the planes.
Would that make them immune to anti-magic because it's pure
No.
planar energy, or would that?
It does not, because the way the anti-magic field works is it literally pushes all magic in the multiverse, no matter where it's coming from, out of that sphere.
Okay.
So basically, if you were to use, for example, detect magic, and the way I picture detect magic is kind of, well, at least for warlocks, is basically you see every magic has its own color. That's how I perceive detect magic from my warlock's perspective. And so basically what you would see is all magic that was in that sphere before the spell was cast is now pushing at the sphere. So basically, for example, if a zombie were to walk into it, and we've discussed this before, in our minds, a zombie would fall prone. The magic would be forced out of its body that is animating it. So, zombie walks in, it falls down. In my mind, necrotic energy is green. So,
There'd be a green
what my
thing
warlock would
pushing
see
at the
would
wall.
be basically like this green magical energy that is in the form of a human pushing at the barrier, trying to get to the corpse that it's supposed to be animating. Once the sphere is then, for example, if the caster were to move, that energy would then, as soon as possible, enter into the body and reanimate it. And that's basically what you would see from my warlock
So
perspective.
you're still using your magic, but the second you try to, it tries to get. It's like a blocked connection. It's trying to get there, but it stops. Which means if you spam a bunch of your abilities in an anti-magic sphere and then it's gone, you suddenly get hit with all of that at once.
It's like
Actually, yes. That is pretty much how it works. Because there are spells that do mention the fact that, actually I believe it's in the antimagic sphere spell itself, if you are using a spell that requires concentration, as long as you're still maintaining concentration, it is still in effect.
It's just
It's
suppressed.
just suppressed. Nothing is happening at the time. So if you walk in with haste, you instantly become slower. But the moment you step back out, you gain your haste back.
Or if you have like a javelin of lightning and you throw it, nothing happens, but once it leaves the sphere, it turns into a lightning bolt again.
Yes.
Just that.
That's a good point. I was going to say, one of my favorite comics, it's a D&D comic called The Order of the Stick, has this really fun moment where you have this battle versus like this epic level mage and a dragon. And one of the things that I always like to think, that I always like to remember when fighting an anti-magic field, if a human walks into an anti-magic field, they're just a human. But if a dragon walks into an anti-magic field, they're still a dragon.
Yes. They are not
Stomp on it.
controlled by magic.
Yes.
Yes, some of them are arcane casters, but that is a select few, and their fire breath is not magic.
That's fair.
So, going off what we just discussed with the anti-magic sphere, just shunting it out. So, if a paladin's using their divine smite on a weapon, because this happened to us earlier, if they use divine smite on a weapon and threw that out of a magic sphere to hit something, would it still be enchanted? Would the weapon be divine smiting?
That's the problem, is that divine smite has to be a melee attack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you had a halberd, like what you did,
Yeah.
you had a halberd and you were stabbing somebody 10 feet away, outside the sphere,
Technically,
Would
he
the
was
halberd-
15.
50, would the halberd have divine smite on it, or would it not?
I guess that kind of depends. Does divine smite for a paladin come from him projecting magical energy into the weapon, or does it come from his oath summoning it to the blade?
Well,
Is it an external source, or is it an internal source? Because if it's internal, then he cannot use it if he's in the sphere. But if it's an external source, he can use it all he wants, as long as his weapon is reaching someone that's outside the sphere.
I feel like so I feel like what happens is clerics and paladins are at the beginning of every day. So when you take a long rest and pray to your deity, they give you power and magic, and then you can use that. So I feel like it's an internal source as opposed to it's originally an external source, but after that point, I feel like it becomes an internal source.
Mm-hmm.
Just you're drawing upon this power that your god has given you.
it's like taking a copy and paste.
Exactly. So one of the things that you can mess around with that I read in a book at one point. It's called, I think it was called Guide to Magic. That sometimes clerics or paladins will pray to their god like, "Hey, can you give me this spell?" And they're like, "Actually, no, I'm not going to give you that spell, but I will give you this spell because you're going to need it today." And they're like, "But I need cure wounds. This is going to be great." It's like, no, you need life transference. That's more important. You'll find out why.
That's
So
the other
in here,
interesting-
you have to expend a spell slot.
Yeah.
So with that, I would say it would be an internal source, since you have to expend the energy
There you go.
to push it out.
So then if you got, like, say, your hand out, then the magic you're channeling is accessible to your hand. All other effects hit your hand. The rest of you are not. Okay, so I guess where I'm going with this is, do you have to have all of you in an anti-magic sphere to have nothing with magic on you? Or is it just a tiny bit of you touching, no magic whatsoever? Because I think anything outside the sphere gets magic,
I
right?
think that actually depends on where your source of magic, your ability to cast spells come from. For example, a wizard. I would say if their head is in an anti-magic sphere, they can't cast spells.
Because it's all intelligence based.
Yes. Same with druid and ranger, wisdom and cleric, wisdom-based classes, all in their head. Same goes for paladin, bard, and sorcerer, charisma-based. Most of your charisma comes from your speaking. Thus, also your head. So if your head is in it, I would say you can't cast spells.
Interesting. I really like battle maps. So whenever I do this, my ruling is if your token is inside the anti-magic field, you can't use magic.
Yeah.
If it's outside the anti-magic field, it counts. It gets a little weirder when you're like just the combat of the mind, where I can't remember what the phrase is called anymore. Just dang Spanish. That's where it gets. I feel it's a little more iffy, but I like that. If your head is in there, it doesn't work. Or I feel like I would probably even rule this if your torso is in there as well. Just
if your head is out and your torso's in, you're
An
doing
Aarakocra.
something weird.
You're an Aarakocra. See, that's the thing. Aarakocras actually can do this. They could technically have their feet in an anti-magic sphere and still have the rest of their body out. If someone else casts it and they're just flying above them, they can be out and in. But it doesn't really help them at all because the point of an anti-magic sphere is to avoid being blasted by a fireball. If you're sticking your head out, you're still getting hit by a fireball.
that's fair. I mean, either that or making death saving throws.
Yes.
All right. So the final verdict: divine sense, divine health, and their final capstone transformation thing, all magical, suppressed, and anti-magic.
Oh, that would be so brutal. Cast anti-magic on someone that just went god mode.
Oh. No, so it would all still be suppressed, so the duration wouldn't continue on.
No, the duration does continue.
No. Oh, okay.
So you can literally, if you keep them in an anti-magic sphere for the full duration, they have wasted it.
Interesting.
All right. So, moving on to other classes. What other ones do we have that use magical abilities that might be
How
controversial?
long does a druid allow themselves to be in a wild form?
Wild form is 1 hour per use until 20th level when it's unlimited.
Okay, so in which case, if they were to walk in an anti-magic sphere, I think we've agreed that they would be transformed back, right?
Yes.
I feel like that it's the magic that transforms them, but after they're transformed, well, I guess because it also does have the duration, so then that
It has the duration, and then if they
Magic.
die in that form, they're
Revert.
automatically inverted back.
Okay.
So I feel
If
like
it
they
was
would be-
true polymorph, that would be different. But
That's
since it's just a minor shape change,
So basically, I feel
So
like
not
what would
very
happen is they would enter, they would be transformed back. The moment they leave, as long as they wanted it to happen, they would be returned back in the animal form as long as they have not basically, in a way, lost concentration. It's not like a concentration thing, but it's up
As
to
long,
their
as long
choice.
as they haven't dismissed it, they'll
Yeah.
come right back to that.
I like that.
And almost everything else is suppressed.
Yes.
Warlocks aren't special. I'm sorry, guys.
No.
They lose all multi-attack and everything.
All their Eldritch invocations,
They can't even summon
packed
attack
weapons, all of that. The worst place for a warlock is in an anti-magic sphere.
Unless you're a hexblade, and then you just have all your weapon proficiencies, and you're like, I can use medium armor.
It's true.
But then they would lose because hexblades. I think they can channel their magic through their items and use charisma for that, so they immediately go back to strength and dexterity.
Yeah.
So it's not ideal.
As
Hexblades
long
would be
as-
somewhat okay, but
As
it's
long
not
as my
ideal.
warlock
It's
has his
true.
rifle out, he could still use it. He would just only have one attack around.
That's true.
But
Powder,
that's still
shot, everything.
one attack.
still one attack.
At decent range.
Okay, that is almost an hour.
Oh dang.
Already?
That
That's
was
just
quickly.
Merlin. We got a lot of mileage out of that last.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad.
Well, this was good. Good benefit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you guys for inviting us on.
Okay, I think we'll end it there. Please subscribe, like, comment for more. Any other questions? Pretty
Yeah,
sure Merlin's
ask
the only
questions.
one that's commented so far. But
Merlin has brought up good questions, but we ran out of time, so we can't get to those. Maybe next time we'll pull those out. But yeah, comment, ask questions. We'd love to answer them, give you our scoop on them. But have a great day. Like, subscribe, like Russell said, and we'll see you next time.
Merry Christmas!
Yeah,
Farewell.
Merry Christmas.
Your hits ever be crits?
It always ends with us leaning forward to see the end.
Because I can't